Okay, we're going to be learning a Sicha. I realize now we learned the Sicha not too many years ago on Shlach from the year Tafshin Yud Beis. So in that year, the Rebbe started off the Farbrengen. Hold on a second. That year, the Rebbe started off the Farbrengen with the mimer on Kisivah al Aretz, talking about the Nesachim, talking about the pourings of the wine and the oils on the Mizbeach. That's at the end of the day, it comes with all the karbonates, it comes with all the sacrifices when Kisavayu Alar, when you enter the land of Moshe Seichem, the land of your settlement, which is Eretz Yisrael, is when the laws of the Nesachim, the pourings and the oils of the oils and the wines come into full effect. So that's the Rebbe talks about that Beruchnis. What's the idea of the difference between Shema, from below up, avoda that we lift ourselves up, to the avoda of the milmayla from above down. So the tefillin is from above down, and the Shema Yisrael is from below up. The idea of the karbonas, the sacrifices, are from we lift ourselves up. Ishay la Hashem, a fire to God, and the nesachim is the pourings, like the liquids that go from above down, like chesed. So there's between chesed and gevura. So that was the idea of the mimer. So it says, "Kvei kedush ad mishlita tziv lenagin va'omer mimer divrei maskos kisavayu al aretz as al aretz meishvei seichem." The Rebbe said the mimer are about the ideas of the nesachim, the pourings. Okay, now the sicha starts. Behemshech lahamevur leil b'mimer. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a connection between the mimer and the farbrengen. So based on what we said before in the mimer, what is the idea of the pourings on the Mizbeach, the wines and the oils that we pour on the Mizbeach that go all the way down to the Shisim, all the way down to the base of the earth in Avodas Hashem. The idea of the pourings is to bring down from above down. Yesh lahaisiv. So the Rebbe says, I'd like to add Lekutei Torah Parsha Seinu. In this week's Lekutei Torah, there's a few by Maram on this idea of the nesachim of the pourings. Isa, it says, a person should humble himself or herself. To say, it's okay, or it should be, that the Eved, the servant, lias karabi, to be like his or her master. And we should make a resting place for Hashem here in this world. Hey, Sharna. What's the idea of dai le'eved lias karabi? That you could emulate God. If God is above, and nevertheless He brings down His light, His godliness to this physical world. So emulate Hashem. This Eved is referring to the person. So the servant should be like his or her master, which is Hashem, to make this world for a resting place for Hashem. If God could do it, you could do it. If it's not beneath God to make this place a resting place, it's not beneath you to get out of your 4 cubits of space and go and engage the world to make the world a place of godliness. Kloimer, the Rebbe explains, Al Yemer Adam, a person shouldn't say, I have no interest. This again, the Rebbe is talking 1952. I have no interest to lower myself from my elevated level, so to say, I'm a parish and separated from the world. I have to go out and engage in physical, material things, which is similarly what the spies were saying. This Eved, the servant, should be like this, like the master. Just like God desired that His presence and He should have a resting place and a home in this material, physical space of this world. It should be okay for you also to engage to make this world into a resting place for Hashem. He switches to Yiddish to Rebbe as Unstein. It should also make sense to you. Later, go out and engage physical things, v'churiim, and material things. Make those physical space things, articles, time, right, makom and zman, into a resting place for Hashem. And as we know that there's the concept that's brought down by Chazal, that the tzaddikim, it's the Medrash, Bereshis Rabbah, that the righteous are like the Creator, meaning, So when we look at this is a Farbrengen for Chodesh Tammuz. We have to remember Chodesh Tammuz is the Shabbos and Varchim. We bless the month of Tammuz is the month of Chodesh of Geula, which starts with Gimel and Yud Beis Tammuz, the redemption of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, 1952. The Rebbe is referring to that, and of course, this Shabbos for Chassidim is the Shabbos before Gimel Tammuz, the yard side of the Rebbe. So when we're talking about a Shabbos that reflects as a Chassid on what it means to be Mekusher, like today's Ayom Yom, what does it mean to be connected to a Rebbe? So the Rebbe says, Harigam b'yaches aleim, when it comes to a tzaddik, tzarech leimer, a person should say that if you're a Chassid of a Rebbe, and you look how your Rebbe behaves, so you could say, Dai la'eved li'es k'rabbai, the servant should be like the master. And in our situation, Sheish limud b'hanaygasav shel Rebbe. Look how the Rebbe behaved when he went out to the world and engaged in people. If we analyze certain behaviors of the Frierdiker Rebbe, we could take a lesson that it's not beneath us to do certain things. The Rebbe explains. Why am I talking about this? Because this Shabbos, who Shabbos and Varach b'Chodesh Tammuz, is the Shabbos that we bless the month of Tammuz. Asher ba yesh na'ayem amyuchad d'Beis Tammuz. What's special about Tammuz is that on your Tammuz we have the holiday, the celebration of the liberation of the previous Rebbe on the 12th of Tammuz. Yom HaYiledes, it's also the birthday of the previous Rebbe. Yom HaGeula, and the redemption. Shal Kvay Kedush Marechami Admer, for my father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. L'chein, therefore, Harizeh HaZman HaMatim, it's an appropriate time. L'hispainin, for a person to contemplate. V'hanagosei Shal HaRebbe, Be'ez HaMaser v'Hagula, how the Rebbe behaved in his imprisonment and redemption. Gam b'meshach HaZman shebein HaYitziyah mebeis HaAsurim l'Geulus Yud Beis Tammuz v'Yesa b'ir miklate kastrama. And also there was an in-between time. There was the way the previous Rebbe was arrested on the 15th of Sivan, like we spoke last week. And from 15th of Sivan until the 3rd of Tammuz, he was incarcerated in the heavy imprisonment of the communists for spreading Torah and Yiddishkeit, specifically Jewish education. On the 3rd of Tammuz, he was sent into exile officially for 3 years to the city called Kostroma. So even over there, we could analyze his behavior, although he was only there to end for 10 days, of his behavior when he was in the city of Kostroma. Pina Nidachas, the city of Kostroma was the middle of nowhere, right? 10 stops after no place. Is him shecharebi la'asik barvatzis atayr vatzis yadus. Nevertheless, you would think here the previous Rebbe is sent to a no place. Literally, that's what the communists would do, like they did to the Rebbe's father. They sent him to no place, a place that you can't seemingly do anything there. The Rebbe was far from Chassidim, far from any Jewish institutions. Nevertheless, the Rebbe figured out ways to spread the teachings of Torah and Chassidus. Kamai, first of all, like what did the previous Rebbe do as soon as he got there? There were some Jews. So Yasad Cheder, he right away instituted that there should be a school. Mikvah, he set up a mikvah, kosher mikvah for women and men to go to the mikvah. V'keyetzebe, etc. Obiyem Shabbos Kodesh, and that Shabbos, again, there wasn't that many Chassidim. As it says, Herech Rebbe b'tfilasi beis hakneses, the Rebbe davened a long time in the shul of the city of Kostroma. Seemingly, based on the time frame, you would assume the previous Rebbe, I think, could have been there 2 Shabbosim. If he was there Gimel Tammuz and then Yud Beis Tammuz was Shabbos, so maybe he was there 2 Shabbos, maybe 1 or 2 Shabbosim. So he was there, he davened long at shul. Davar sha'oirer, his lengthy prayer, Reishim Ravu Pelegadol, it made a big impression. Again, you have to remember this was a city, a shtetl in the middle of nowhere, that had never seen a Rebbe before, any kind of Rebbe or great rabbi. Yehudi Mispala the Shar Shalish Arba Chetzraim, they never seen a Jew davening till 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. Kulam Kfar Saimim Mizmanas at Tefillah. The rest of the congregation finished the prayers way before. So to the Shabbos, the 8 Shabbos, you have to remember the way we know the communist situation, it evolved. It wasn't like the day the communists took over, all of a sudden everything shut down. It was a process, like these things work. So still people were going to shul, people were eating the Shabbos. But again, these were simple folk who didn't have much connection to the outside world. So they went, they davened, they ate their meal, and here the Rebbe is still davening. The Gamas speak Elisha, they also had a time to take a short nap. Mehat Shain, Abgedavened, they davened, the Rebbe says in Yiddish, Abgegessen, they ate. And sich ausgeschlafen, they slept, they had a sleep. The Kan Oymed Loi Rabin, here standing a Rav, Rabin they called him in Russia. And Mispala Dain, and he's still davening. Such a big commotion that here the Rebbe, they didn't know who this Rebbe was, that the Rebbe is sitting here, davening a whole afternoon. Shafila Koimer, even the local priest, Shel Ha'ira of the city, Baba Atzma, the basic Knesset, the word went out even to the Gentiles, that this great Rav from I guess from central Russia, from Moscow, then I think the Rebbe lived in Moscow, from Moscow was davening all these hours. So the priest came to check it out. Leroy says, Apel Agadol, to see this wonder, a person standing in a talus for hours on end praying. Velimris Koza. And nevertheless, Hare ha'uvda shebiyam eila lo yahya Rabbi Yechel lichtav michtav liyehudi. So here, the Rebbe is saying like this. So seemingly, here the Rebbe was given limited options as far as being a Rebbe. But he did whatever he could. He made a yeshiva, he opened up a shul. I mean, he made a school, he opened up a mikveh. I guess they didn't have a mikveh, so you can imagine what kind of community it was. He davened long, he was making a big impression. So you would think that's he didn't have anything, he couldn't do much more. What do you want from him? Nevertheless, the Rebbe said, the very fact that he should be Yom Elu in these times, because of the restrictions that the Russians put on him, he had no way of sending letters, and he wanted to send a letter to someone for encouragement. The person needed the Rebbe's help for simple things, not great Hasidic insight, whether it was an advice in business or what have you. It pained the Rebbe that here there was a Chassid or a Jew, let's say who this person was waiting for insight from the Rebbe on something simple. And here the Rebbe, because of these restrictions, couldn't write him a letter. I guess he couldn't even send a telegram. He didn't go alone. He went with, I think his daughter Chana went with him, and I think one or two Chassidim. So he said to one of the Chassidim, that he had a few close Chassidim that were allowed to travel as, so to say, help for the Rebbe. Like, for instance, a Chassid Rebbe Eliyahu Chaim, the Chassid Rebbe Eliyahu Chaim, or the Chassid Rebbe Michal Dvorkin. Those are two Chassidim that went with the Rebbe. I think Rebbe Eliyahu Chaim is Altos, yeah. So he said, She'im Kain, if it's such a situation that he can't write a letter, we learned to Sicha a few years ago. He can't write a letter. This is the situation. Why do I need my hand? Here the Rebbe talked very extreme. That as far as he's concerned, why does he have a hand? So he could write a letter to give encouragement or insight to another Jew. So here he's being productive. It wasn't like he was absolutely out of production. But he wasn't productive on the level he would like or the level he felt that he was needed for. He says, why do I have a hand if I can't write a letter? He expressed himself. He says, it's better that my hand dry up. Raza means it dries up like the the hand should become thin, i.e., then if I can't write a letter. So here the Rebbe says, just pay attention to the story. The Rebbe is not just, the Rebbe wasn't a person who just spoke. Friedrich Rebbe was very expressive. He wrote his books, his writings in Chassidus and Sichos, the Kuti Deburim, his memoirs, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Achronis are fascinating. All the history that we know of Chabad from way before the Alter Rebbe is all from the previous Rebbe's writings, his Achronis, his memoirs. So here they have a Rebbe who was he could have written stuff for himself. I don't know if maybe they didn't give him a pen at all, but it seems like he didn't have an option to send a letter. So here he says, we're talking about the holy hand of the Rebbe. He put tefillin on his hand. He did other things, Shal Kedusha. Means for himself, he was able to use his hands for, it wasn't like his hands didn't do anything holy. His hands had positive things. He held a siddur, he wrapped tefillin, right? Even if you put tefillin on your left hand, you use your right hand. The Rebbe says, because a few days have passed, that he wanted to pen a letter that should obviously be posted to go to a chassid or a Jew. They needed his insight, and he can't write the letter. And not like he wasn't productive. He was doing other things. He set up a mikvah, a school. It's not for himself, but for the local area. And why is he in the city in the first place? Is because he spent all his time and efforts in spreading Torah and Chassidus. Nevertheless, he says, what do I need a hand for? Let it dry up. Zizol updar in it should become thin. If someone needs me and I can't help him. The Rebbe says, it's not a story about a Rebbe. Again, if you read about the Friedrich Rebbe was not an exaggerator, and he was expressive. but he wasn't an exaggerator. If he said that, he meant it. The Rebbe took the previous Rebbe at his word and everything. If the previous Rebbe said a story, then that's exactly how it happened as far as the Rebbe is concerned. If the Rebbe heard a story from anyone else, then it could have happened, it could have not happened. The Rebbe never, literally, when the Rebbe would tell a story, if he heard it from his father-in-law, that's exactly how it happened. If he didn't hear it from his father-in-law, he didn't even know if the story ever happened. He took it for granted, like you hear a story. So here we say this. The point is the previous Rebbe, if he said something, he meant it. So the Rebbe says, Anhagazu, this has to be a lesson. When we're talking about Dai Lev Elias Karabi, that a chassid should be like his Rebbe or her Rebbe. So here we have a lesson. Every person, man and woman. When it comes to engaging another person, there's people that they claim or they think. Why do I have to go from my elevated space to reach out to someone who's in a lower level, to engage someone who's yarud, is down, maybe by choice? That person got themselves in a situation, they're not religious, whatever it is, whether it's spiritual needs or material physical needs. Why do I have to leave my high space to go down to this person? I have time. Everyone has allocated time. I have 24 hours a day. So I could accomplish much with myself. I could study, I could learn, I could write, I could teach on a higher level of education. You want me to go out and deal with a person who's yared, who's beneath me? If you want it on the checks and balances of what's been accomplished, I'll accomplish much more if I work with myself. Let me work on myself. Of course, someone has to deal with lower things, teaching the aleph bays of Torah mitzvahs, again, to children, not children in age, like the previous Rebbe would say. Age is not about the passport. Age is about the education. Right? A bursiki is a tanner. Right? No, who wants to be a tanner? No one wants to be the tanner. Like, for instance, again, we don't have, I'm not talking negative about any jobs, but there's certain jobs, that a person that a bursiki, a tanner. Of course, we need a tanner. Someone has to do it. Why do I have to be the person doing it? Someone has to go down and lower themselves to teach the aleph bases of life, to do the simple work, to deal with simple people, to deal with things that you feel is beneath you. And why am I wasting my time with it? Sure, someone has to do it. Why me? So, a person may say, a person may claim, that they're not accomplishing anything. I'm not the right person for the job. I don't see I'm being effective. I will go out there, fine, I'm a chassid, I'm doing it, let's say, Kabbalah Sol, I'm accepting the yoke. I'm not effective. I'll be much more effective if I work with myself. On the contrary. So they see, on the one side, they're finding that engaging in others and going out to the world, it's a distraction for what they really want to do, which is studying for themselves and elevating themselves. And on the flip side, they don't even see any accomplishment. So what's the whole purpose of this exercise? So a person may claim, and again, you have to remember, here the Rebbe is talking in 1952, when he's educating his chassidim, and this is still present till today, of sacrificing your own gain for going out and engaging, going out to shlichus, going out as emissaries, or engaging people and building up institutions, while you could, sometimes just aleph bays or tefillah, saying Shema Yisrael, putting on film with people, when you feel you could be studying and accomplishing much more. And especially, they don't feel that they're accomplishing anything. They're not successful when they're going out and engaging in the world. So what's the purpose of the exercise? So they claim. What does God want from me? Why do you want me to go down and engage in seemingly what's called binyanim tachtainim, lower things, simple things? Noch was darf man kriechen in niedrigen Janim? The Rebbe says in Yiddish. Why do I have to crawl into small ideas with this aske mekach? And I'm in the same time shalulim lavich has shalom matziv the yiftu levavchem. And also I'm making myself vulnerable to become influenced by that. I could get influenced if I go out to this environment. Until I go off the way, I'm going to become vulnerable. So I'm not accomplishing anything. I could accomplish much more if I worked with myself. B, I'm making myself vulnerable to, so to say, the worldly environment. Akapanim medakas dakas, even if I'm not going to about to serve idols, but it's going to take its toll and its effect on my spirituality. Adach ma'amar zal Yisrael shebechutz laaretz. Oivdim avodah zara b'tarnheim. There's an expression that's brought down in the Gemara that anyone who lives outside of Eretz Yisrael and chutz laaretz is more involved in worldly things, and that's why it's called oivdei avodah zara b'tara. It's called serving idols, idol worship in its purity. I mean, you're not bowing down physically to an idol, but you're bowing down to the ATM. So what's the answer? God also takes a chance on us. The whole world's a chance. How many wins does God have? So you look at the Rebbe. Look at Lias Karabi. The student should look at his master. Don't start making your own calculations. Say it's beneath me. What am I going to accomplish? I'm making myself vulnerable. Someone else can do it. There's a Borsiki. Yes. Why do I have to be the Borsiki? Why do I have to be the tanner? So you look. Lias Karabi. Look at what your Rebbe would do. Limreis haflos malos Rebbe. The Rebbe could have taken the time he was in Kastrima to do his bodhidus, right? Perfect time. Baruch Hashem. I can't write letters. I can't communicate with anyone. I could learn Torah, write my marim, write more of his writings, right? So now, and here we're talking about a Rebbe, a person who's actually could take advantage of this quiet time. So limris haflos malos shel Rebbe, not understanding the greatness of the Rebbe. Hayilei matim im is ungestanden. This asik binyanim shutim. He would rather write a letter to someone about simple things. Again, it was evidently not a letter about some Hasidic insight. It was in a letter, probably something to do with something basic. And we're not even sure it has to do with something basic about Yiddishkeit. Could have been basic about the person's personal life. And it was so much important, it was such an importance to the Rebbe to be able to engage even in something simple. And he actually could have taken the opportunity to work on himself, that he felt, what's the purpose of my hand in the first place if I can't write a letter to give someone encouragement? If it made sense for the Rebbe in his mind, to better go out there and help someone and do something, bring someone encouragement, even if it's something simple. So we're not the Rebbe. And we're not going to sit there spending 24 hours a day this and writing and davening in the shul till 5 o'clock. Let's be honest. So it's okay that to lower yourself off your pedestal and to go out and engage in others. Notwithstanding of all your great accomplishments. Whether the accomplishments are true. Even imaginary accomplishments. It means you place yourself on a higher pedestal than you really are. The Rebbe said in Yiddish, as much as you may hold of yourself on an elevated level, you still know you're not the Rebbe. And if that's the case, if you can find it within yourself to go out and engage another person, if you can't use any other contemplation to figure out why it makes sense to engage with someone else, to go out there and work with someone else, then just think one thing. If the Rebbe could do it, you could do it. And that's the idea of Nesachim. And this is why it's based on the Maimer of the Torah, which is based on the God that makes the same calculation. God could say the same thing. Who needs this man? Who needs this problem? Who needs this problem? The fighting, the wars. Who needs all this whole creation? What's the purpose of it all? What's the return on the investment here? God says, we say, nevertheless, God does it, you could do it. The Rebbe does it, you could do it. Here the Rebbe says an amazing thing. The idea is not to submit to something you don't want to do, although you still understand that you shouldn't be doing it. You want to be Lias Karabi, you really want to be like your Rebbe, like your teacher. Do what your teacher does. And then Lias Karabi, you will be like your teacher. Starts off Tchila Kirabi, the Chaf Adimyan. We know that in the alphabet, the letter Chaf before a letter means as if, almost like your Rebbe. And then without the Chaf before, without the as if. If you go and you commit your life, and your life is based on every decision you make, is what would my Rebbe do in this situation? And I want to emulate my Rebbe, that how would my Rebbe approach such a situation? So then it's not Kirabbai, then you're an extension of your Rebbe. Like the halach is brought down about the concept of a messenger, that a messenger becomes totally in place of the person who sends him or her. And then for the shliach is like as an extension of the person who he or she represents. That's the first Sicha. We'll go a little further. Based on what we said before, we were talking about again in the Maimer, and from the Maimer, the Rebbe went into the first Sicha, the idea of Dai Levet Ki Lias Karabai, that the idea of Nesachim is to bring down the light from a high place to a low place. So the idea about the Nesachim with the pourings, again, the pourings were on the Mizbeach, on the sacrifices, Ki Sevayu Al Aretz, the laws kicked in this week's Parsha, that when you enter the land, so all the sacrifices are required to have different types of pourings, but the pourings are based on different pourings of wines and oils that went down to the shisin, went down to the base of the Mizbeach, and in the base there was a drain system that went evidently all the way down to the shisin, which is all the way down to the core of the world, and as far as you could dig, and then they poured the nesachim, right? We're trying to. Soul has to this week's parsha, the nesachim, right? Pouring into the shisin, breaking into the ground. All right. V'hamevin yavin. Those who understand. Hamshacha lamata, she was asking simazulis. This idea that we said before, that we have to engage others. Yesh lahaisiv lahavir. The Rebbe says, I would like to add. Gam leidach gisa al davar atzarich v'akor b'avodas imatzmei. So here the Rebbe says there has to be a balance. Actually, I was speaking about this with someone I was learning with this yesterday afternoon, by me Thursday afternoon, where the Rebbe says that as much as you have to go out and engage in others, there's also the part that you have to make sure you give time for yourself. Here the Rebbe says as a lesson, when it comes to the idea of the Shema and the Tefillin. In the Maimer it talked about that the zevach, the korban, is like the Shema. Just like a korban, the fire burns upwards. The Shema Yisrael's idea of the point of the Shema, although it's a culmination of all the prayers up to the Shema, but the point is that the prayers up to the Shema should lead, that you say the Shema in such a way that v'hafta es Hashem Elokecha, and you really Shema, you really pay attention that Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's the idea of lifting yourself upwards towards God, like a sacrifice, the fire goes upwards. So that's the idea of zevach, that the Shema is like the zevach, and Nesachim, the pourings are like the tefillin, which is, tefillin is a mitzvah that goes, you bring the light of God down into the physical space. Move in Maimer Zal, like it says, and the Rebbe quoted this in the Maimer, Kol HaKari Krishma B'lei Tefillin, that a person who can wear tefillin and says the Shema without tefillin, obviously Shema is said with tefillin only in times that you can, where there's in the mornings and in the weekdays, and if you're a male, is Ki'ilu Hikriv Zevach B'lei Nesachim. Then it's considered as if you sacrificed the Zevach sacrifice, you had the korban, but you didn't have the pourings. So the Rebbe explains, and what's this have to do with avodas atzmait, with working on yourself? It means the Rebbe always wanted that you can't. Sometimes a person gets so involved in askanas, so involved in dealing and working with others, that they totally forget about themselves, and they forget about themselves in a way where they become careless about themselves. It's not important what I do; it's all about what I do with others. But in order to really be productive with others, you have to be solid with yourself. The Rebbe says. He says we find that there are people, the Rebbe says even Chasidim and people of stature, that will read the early Shema, means the Shema before the davening, without tefillin. The Rebbe says in my writings, the Rebbe had later, after the Rebbe passed away in Gimel Tamas, we found the Rebbe had Rishimas, which is now published. It was at that time. It was not published. Rishimas are the diaries or the private journals of the Rebbe. It's Sainasi Mashashemati Mikvay Marichami. I heard from my father-in-law, meaning the previous Rebbe. Sha'aviv Kvay Kedush is Admon Nishmaseidin, that his father, which is the Rebbe Nishmaseidin, known as the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe Yechabad Shalom Dov Besh Nersin. Hayikar Krishma Ketana B'Tfilin. He always read even the morning Tefillin. He would read the morning Shema and Tefillin. The Rebbe says, although I heard it from my father-in-law that the previous Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, even the morning tefillin, the Rebbe Rashab would wear with the morning Shema, the Rebbe Rashab would wear with tefillin, but that didn't spill over to the Chasidim. The Chasidim don't. So why do we say the Shema early? Sometimes if you're not davening nets, the nets people, the nets crowd, let's say I always daven Shema and Tefillin. Why? Because as soon as I wake up, I say the nets. I say Shema right away. My Tefillah Shachar in the early morning. But some people don't. Not everyone davens nets, and sometimes you're going to daven late, and you may miss the Zman Krishma. So we say Krishma before, just in case, because it's the deraisa. It's biblical. It's biblical to say the Shema every day. So you have to say Shema before a certain time. Right, the Sef Zman Krishma is whatever, depending on the morning in the winter, summer, but around sometimes between 10 and 9:30 and 10 o'clock, or sometimes 8:30, depending on the time of the year. So in order that you don't miss the Zman Krishma Midaraisa, so we say the Krishma Katana, we say it privately, separate from davening, and then when we daven like this, we cover ourselves, make sure that we've said the Shema properly. So here the Rebbe says, why are we saying the Shema early? Because we're scared we may miss the time. We're not just learning Torah. It's literally to be able to fulfill the biblical obligation of saying Shema. So how is it that if this could possibly be the biblical part of your obligation of saying the Shema, because you may daven later, why would you not put on tefillin then? That means that the main Shema that you're saying is the Shema you say before davening. Because what you're doing is opposite what our rabbis have taught us. That kol hakayr krishma b'lei tefillin. If a person doesn't read the biblical obligation of Shema and says it without the tefillin, ki ilu meidei the sheker b'atzmai, then you're lying, because it says v'hayil tayt tefais beinenecha. We talk about the tefillin in the Shema, and you're not wearing them, so it's like you're lying. You didn't put on tefillin. It says you should put on the tefillin, but you're not doing it. And this came down to this is a big halachic question about how could a person say the Shema, especially if you're going to be your biblical obligation to say the Shema, and you're not wearing tefillin. So there's those who say that's not such a question. Why? It only is referring to a person, not that you're not wearing tefillin now, but you can wear tefillin. Again, this is referring to males who can wear tefillin, or times you can wear tefillin during the week, or not during holidays. But you never put it on. So it's not that you have to put it on as you're saying the Shema. Then it's not called sheker. But if a person doesn't put on Shema, the tefillin by Krishma, it's not considered like a person who means basically there's those who discuss, who does he say it is? Shabbos Chuvas Beis Yosef, the Archaim, Ois Chaim, the Minchas Elazar. So there's different. The Minchas Elazar is the holy Munkatcher Rebbe. There are those who say that it doesn't mean you have to put it on together. Which means that you're a person that puts on tefillin. If you're a person that's obligated to put on tefillin, you put on tefillin, and you say the Shema. So they meet together. It doesn't have to be the same time. So therefore, it's not considered that you're saying you're saying false testimony. But if you can put on tefillin and you never put on tefillin, you don't put on tefillin, and you say the Shema, then it's considered a false testimony. So there's the pratis yaser. We have very, very rarely do we find that the Rebbe would quote something from the Holy Chazir Lublin. I mean, I'm not an expert in all the teachings and the writings of the Rebbe, but I could say that this is one of the only times I've seen the Rebbe quote the Chazir Lublin. So the Rebbe says the Chazir Lublin was a big Rebbe who was buried, who lived in the city of Lublin, Poland. So the Rebbe says, so that we have also the Chazir Lublin explains. Because the Holy Chazir Lublin says, the Chazir means the seer, he's known as the seer of Lublin. That because he says that that a person who puts on, says the Shema without putting on tefillin is like a person who would sacrifice a sacrifice without the pourings. So the Chazir Lublin explains that what's the basis that you could put on tefillin later? Because also the pourings don't have to be done at the same time. You could pour, I mean, even though typically they would pour at the same time, but you could make up if you didn't have the oils and or the wines available, whatever reason you didn't do the pourings, you pour later, although the sacrifice was done at another time. So if the pourings is for the tefillin can also be later. It's possible halachically for a person to bring his or her sacrifice today. You have 10 days to pour your pourings for your sacrifice. So too, if you have 10 days for the pourings and the krishma and the tefillin, the krishma is like the sacrifice, and the tefillin is like the pouring. So you could put on the pourings. You could do the tefillin later. Therefore, it's not false testimony. The Rebbe says he doesn't totally accept the explanation of the chosel of the seer of Lublin. Why? You can't say that the idea of the saying the Shema and the putting on the tefillin is exactly like the idea of sacrifice and the pourings. Because, like we just said, the pourings could be done tomorrow. You can't do things, you can't put on the tefillin tomorrow for today. And you can't say, I'm going to put on tefillin tomorrow for my Shema of today. The Rebbe doesn't accept that. The Rebbe says he says that he's assuming the Chazal would agree with him that if you wouldn't put on tefillin if you're obligated to, and you don't put on tefillin that same day, even if it's later, but if it's not that same day, then it's not. Then it's considered that you put on tefillin. You said the Shema without tefillin, and therefore you're saying a false testimony. And one shouldn't answer. You can't say that really the tefillin is like the pourings. You have 10 days, but there's a certain technicality that in order not to be considered as if you're saying false testimony, so therefore you're obligated to put the tefillin on that same day. But in theory, you could put on you don't have to put it on to connect it to the Shema. Because the night is not a time you could put on tefillin. And therefore, you went through a full 24 hours that you didn't put on tefillin. So then it's considered false testimony. What the Rebbe is basically saying, it's a little bit of a halacha shir. What the Rebbe is going into is that in theory, the idea is that pourings could be done much later. But the pourings themselves, the tefillin also has an idea that it's not just that you have to have the pourings and the sacrifices together, which is represented by the Shema and the tefillin. As the Rebbe explained in the Maimer, that the Shema is the elevation and the tefillin is to bring it down. Gvura and Chesed. Gvura is fire going up, Chesed is bringing down, right? But the technicality is, then it turns into false testimony because you went through a night, a period that you couldn't put on tefillin. So you kind of passed that deadline. The Rebbe says, because the pourings also could only be done by day and not by night. Just like the sacrifice itself. Means if you miss a pouring on a sacrifice for whatever reason, it's not that you could do it at night for up to 10 days. You have to do it only by day, so you have to wait the next morning. The verse says by day. Nevertheless, the night doesn't say, okay, now too late, you can't connect the pouring to the sacrifice before because the night in between separated, and the night is not a time of pouring. So why tefillin does it, yes, separate, and the pourings are not? The Rebbe adds to this question on the seer of Lublin. The Rebbe says that the idea that you shouldn't bring the pourings on at night is biblical, like it says, nevertheless, even though biblically you shouldn't do the pourings at night, it's not considered a separation. That only the rabbis say you shouldn't put it at night. But biblically, you could put on tefillin at night. The only reason we don't put tefillin on at night is the rabbis were concerned that halachically you can't sleep in the tefillin. Where if you're to be up at night, you can wear tefillin. The reason we don't put on tefillin at night is it's the rabbinic concern that at night the person's tired and the person may fall asleep. So if the night is not going to separate is not considered a biblical separation to separate something that although biblically you can't do it at night, like the pourings biblically you can't pour at night because it says b'yom savasei. Nevertheless, it's not a separation. So why is the tefillin that I put on tomorrow cannot be connected to the Shema? The Chazal says the reason is only because at night it's a separation. But seemingly, what's the issue? So the Rebbe explains like this. The explanation is like this. Try to finish this idea. I want to finish off with something in Avoda. Okay. So the idea is like this. Hageder de Eide Sheker b'Krishma b'lei tefillin eini ela kishmevatel mitzvahs tefillin she'ena menichem klal. The idea of what does it mean to say false testimony? That if you say Shema without the tefillin, is only when you're totally nullifying shmevatel mitzvahs tefillin she'ena menichem klal, when you don't put it on at all. But the only problem is the only time it's considered false testimony, the Rebbe says, is if you miss the opportunity to do tefillin. If you miss the opportunity to do tefillin, then it's considered false testimony. As long as you're going to say put on the tefillin, it's not considered false testimony. This now we understand. Why tomorrow's tefillin won't help for today. The aim of the Shlach the kiven she'avar hakol hayom v'lo nich tefillin haribitul mitzvahs tefillin. Because the very fact is, tomorrow is its own mitzvah. Tomorrow you have to put on tefillin again. If you put on tefillin today, you would put on tomorrow. So putting on tomorrow for today is not going to work, because tomorrow you're putting on tefillin for the next day. So therefore, you missed out a mitzvah of that day. Upshita shleima hani har shemidaraisa have a laila zman tefillin the kiven shemnegei lepoil any yechal and yech tefillin b'layla haribitul mitzvah tefillin midaraisa. For the Rebbe says the bottom line is that notwithstanding, if the reason you're not putting it on at night is because the rabbinic says you can't, but the fact is you didn't put it on at night. And if you can't put it on at night, and if you missed the day, so therefore you're saying false testimony because you didn't put on the mitzvah of tefillin on that day. Like what the Rebbe is basically doing in this, let me see how much further it goes. It'll take 5 minutes to finish something else. The Rebbe is basically going in this talk is the idea of justifying. It's an interesting talk. The Rebbe is giving a justification why some people don't put on tefillin when they say Shema, even though one should. But the Rebbe is kind of putting on, giving it a little bit of a pass about the idea of waiting of not putting on tefillin when you say Krishma Katana. But let's just finish off with an idea of avoda. Okay, Yud Aleph. Mikol Hanal. Yesh Lilmod Hayra B'Negei said Avodim Atzmai V'Mazulas. From this, we could all learn about how a person should approach when you do avoda with yourself and when you do avoda with someone else. It means you work on avoda means to work on someone in Torah mitzvahs. Shein v'dugmas beis inyan in the Krishma oila ha'ala avoda ma'atzmai v'tfil nesachim amshachas avoda mazulas. The Rebbe says that in these two categories of elevation and bringing down, elevation is personal. That's the idea of the carbon. You personally elevate yourself. That's your moment. And bringing down is turning the material, anything that you could have an effect on, whether it's even inspiring or affecting another person, is the idea of bringing down. You're bringing down to the next person, not because the person is lower than you, but you're bringing down that person should also have insight and inspiration. So here he says the idea of avoda im atzmai is krishma, and the avoda with the next person is like the pourings. Ubagdama. Yeshem ke'ela, there are those people that get very involved, or for whatever reason they've been appointed in communal affairs. And the Rebbe says sometimes what happens is you start to feel a great excitement. You start to get it gives you a drive, a kick. All the times you could work and be a person of engaging in communal affairs. A great geschmack, you have a tremendous enjoyment. Bisaskos, biaskonis in being an askin, a person of communal work. Kol kach nishtakav, and you become so involved in that. If I feel areingelost in them. They get so involved in communal affairs that you totally forget about yourself. You become so engaged in such an enjoyment in working with others that you only take pride, so to say. You only find motivation, you only find energy in when you're engaging in someone else. When you have to start thinking about yourself, then you feel uncomfortable. And you start forgetting about yourself. And he says, and He doesn't have to think about it. He has all these, when you become a big person of Anaskin, a big person of community affairs, you have secretaries, you have workers, so you can totally offload all the work. This is the lesson of Krishma and Tefillin. As great as Tefillin is, it's even greater that it completes Krishma. That your Shema, if you can only worry about yourself and you don't have askanis, you don't work with others, then your Shema isn't complete. But nevertheless, you don't put on tefillin the whole day. Sometimes you have to say Shema. Here the Rebbe is saying there's an avoid idea of saying the Shema before tefillin. Sometimes you have to give yourself 10, 5 minutes, an hour, whatever that time is that you need, to do your zevach, to do your sacrifice. Aleph, limreis goydel ha'mailish baskanis tzipuris. Now understanding the great idea of communal work and work with others. You also have to know that even that has limitations. Shachas, whether it's an hour, Beis Gimel Dalet, is it 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is. But there's a certain amount of time that's you have to dedicate to communal affairs. A person has to know. What the Rebbe is saying is time management and limitations creates productivity also. If you can do what you have to do, whether it's an hour to 4 hours or in between, so that means that's the time you need, and you don't need more time than that. And if you're giving yourself more time than that, then actually you're not really being productive, because you really need 4 hours or 1 hour to do communal affairs. And if you spend your time wisely, that'll be enough time, and then you could do the other things you have to do, also including working on yourself. If you don't need more time, don't add more time. Because if you only need a certain allocated time, so you're not going to add anything, you're just going to waste time. Just like tefillin has its set time. Today we don't wear tefillin all day. And therefore, because we wear tefillin during the davening, that's the time you need to be effective with tefillin. The Rebbe says, base. At the same time, when you're doing communal affairs, you must think about yourself. Don't forget about yourself. Means your own flesh. Don't ignore. A person may say, why do I have to do the things that everyone else does? I'm a communal person. I don't have time to go to the mikveh. No, gain in Wasser, go into the water. You have to learn Chassidus before. Daven properly. Like the Chassid, he happened to be Reb Gershon Dov, is my great-great-great-grandfather. His name is Reb Gershon Dov Bahar. My father's great-grandfather. My father's great-great-grandfather. Reb Gershon Ber would say, tomorrow has to be a whole new day. If today, as great as today was, there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's talking about yourself. Not only that, the Rebbe says, like I said before, if you really want to be productive in engaging in others, that's only if you don't ignore yourself. What the Rebbe is concerned was, what the Rebbe is saying, obviously, his concern over here is that a person could sometimes get so involved, they consciously or subconsciously ignore their own things that they have to work on themselves, things that need correcting or engaging, whether it's the mikveh, davening, learning, or other things that you need. It's best is just to throw it under the carpet. And I'm busy. I have to deal with other people. So it's a tactic of never getting things done when it comes to yourself. The Rebbe says it doesn't work like that. There's the Shema and there's the Tefillin. They're two separate things. You want to be a proper askin, a proper person that helps others. You have to work. You're looking at yourself as well. Don't sink in so much in others until you forget about yourself. You won't know anything that's going on in yourself. The Rebbe continues along this line that even this is the idea of Dai Lev Lias Karaboy. Let's finish off the last ideas of the Sicha. So let's just finish off the last two paragraphs. And only when a person is complete in this way. Actually, let's see. I don't have another class. I'm going to just finish off the last from the top of 12. We could add. Even in this idea that don't forget about yourself, also we can learn from the Rebbe. Aside from what we said before, that a person should learn from his Rebbe, that you should put yourself to the side. It's okay to go out and it's required for you to go out and make the world a dwelling place for Hashem. By engaging others. You have don't make that the master. The avoda the master. The avoda is you are an eved, you're a servant. To be like the master. You're not doing it because that's what you enjoy, and that's an escape for you for not dealing with your own issues. Only because the Rebbe says you have to be like me, so therefore you do it b'kabbalas ol. The Rebbe taught this idea over the years many times that there has to be that tension. The Rebbe based it one time on the idea of when the Jewish people left the Yamsuf. It says Vayasa Moshe forced the people away from the Yam. Why do you have to force them? Because at the Yam they were doing things. They were taking the sparks. It says they had more sparks by the splitting of the Red Sea that they could have engaged than in Egypt. Nevertheless, Moshe told them it's time to move on. And it says he had to force them. Why do you have to force them? Because to move on, sometimes you have to do what the Rebbe tells you to do, but you don't have a geschmack. Sometimes, okay, if I don't have to work anymore, I'm running away. No, you want to do what you have to do, but there has to be this tension constantly. You have to work on yourself, but you have no choice. You have to work with others. But when you use that as an escape from not dealing with your own issues, then it's a problem. Or they're bad. The person must know. You have to know your character, and the character is that a servant wants to be free. What you're really looking for is freedom. So you have to know how to identify. Is your engaging in others an expression of freeing yourself from your obligation of worrying about yourself? Oh, I don't have to worry about myself. I could throw myself into other people's problems, and then I could ignore my own problems. So you have to know that where's it coming from? Because if an Eved wants to be free, and that's maybe where you're finding your freedom. And because the nature of a servant is to try to be free. You have to be careful because you can't always trust your instincts. Because you want to be free and you have desires that you want to fulfill, and your nature is to be free. You never know. It's not also that it could play with your logic. It doesn't just play with your emotions. It could be because you want to be free. Like I said, that's a way of escaping from dealing with your own problems. Oh, I want to be free from having to work on myself. I'd rather work with others. That I enjoy working with others. Because I could do anything I do, I'm finding fulfillment. Working on myself is hard. You have to be very careful. You can't just rely on yourself. Look what the Rebbe tells you to do. If the Rebbe says it's 1 hour, then it's 1 hour. If the Rebbe says it's 5 hours, it's 5 hours. And the Rebbe says, what is the measurement? How could a person measure this? How do you know, especially if you don't have specific orders? How do you know when you're doing too much? How do you know when you're escaping your own obligations? How do you know if it's not your enjoyment, but it's only because the Rebbe told you? If you see on yourself that for you to engage in others, you feel like it's hard for you, you're lowering yourself and you don't want to do it. We know that when God separated the waters, there was a purpose for it. It means before God separated the waters were one. It wasn't like there was good waters and bad waters. As an entity, the waters were one. On the second day, when God separated the waters, it became two separate ideas. There's the higher waters, which is spirituality, and the lower waters that feed tivus and pleasures of the world. And there's a purpose, because that's what Hashem wanted. But nevertheless, the bottom waters, although they have a purpose, and their purpose is to create to be a water that plants the desires of the world, Baichin, they cry. Why do we have to be the source of physicalities? We want to be with the king. We want to be in the top waters, but they do what they have to do. But there has to be the crying. There has to be the want, the tension. Just like the pourings go down. The waters go down because the Rebbe said because God said they have to go down. The person goes out in the world because his Rebbe tells him or her Rebbe tells him they have to go out to the world. But when you find that as an escape, then you know it's a problem. When you find that your inner core, your waters are calling out that they want to be part of the waters above. What's the idea of boichim? That if you don't want to be here, but you're doing it because that's what Hashem wants, then this is a baruch kavod Hashem imkaimei. You're blessing the presence of God in your space. You're bringing God down from His source to the low place. They say, we don't understand. Why would God go down to the world? A place of tumah, a place of desire, a place of temptation. But when the waters of the low worlds that plant these ideas, and the person withstands it, and they're boichim, they're crying themselves that they want to be by the king, that's Baruch Hashem Imkaimi, that's what God wants to be. That's Hamshachet, to bring down. And through this, that you have that tension. And it's liyas kirabi, to be like your Rebbe. You go out there, but not because you enjoy it, and not because you're ignoring the responsibilities you have to yourself, but because this is what you have to do, and therefore you're doing it as much as you have to do it, but you're not forgetting about yourself, and you're working on yourself to make yourself better, to be more productive and be more effective on others. It's in a saif yik rab, like the Rebbe says, then you will be like your teacher. Not just in comparison, but actually, as long as you have that tension. And that the bottom waters don't want to be where they are. You don't want to be at the far place of the world. You want to be sitting there by the Rebbe, by the Fabrengen. And instead, you're sitting there calling out the pages on Ashrei. Nevertheless, that's Karabai. Even though maybe naturally you want to be free, which is the idea of Evet Kanani, is Nasa Evet Shekol Mitzvusei Eni El Mitzvusei Adin Rab. But if you work on yourself, that's not because you're looking to escape, but you're doing it because that's what is expected from you. And you're doing it, you have that tension and that balance of Shema and Tefillin. So then it's not an Eved that wants to be free, but an Eved that's actually a representative of his or her teacher. There's Zao Inyan, the Eved Neman. Then you go from an Eved Kanani, from a Gentile slave to a faithful slave. Like it says, everyone in my house, this person is trustworthy. Again, this is a Haskashus Verbringen, a deep Verbringen, starting off with the idea of more of Daik Eved. We talked a little bit about the halachic idea of Tefillin and Shema. The Rebbe's conclusion is that there is an idea to say Shema without the Tefillin. The idea is just cutting off 5 minutes for yourself, 10 minutes for yourself, or 5 hours for yourself. But there's that tension, that balance is that you want to work on yourself, but at the same time, you have an obligation to others, and then you're with that kind of balance of tefillin and kriyishma, you'll be productive and you'll be kirabai and rabbi mamash. All right, everyone. I wish you a Shabbos, a good Shabbos. Thank you for joining. And we shall only see ourselves together in good times. Laila tov, good Shabbos, good Chodesh.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi. Thank you.